So the world is coming to an end. Good news, right? The world's coming to an end. Well, that's what they thought in the first century. It had to come to an end because the suffering of the Christian community was so severe. Now, the Gospel of Mark was the first of the Gospels written, and Mark was a Gentile. It was written probably around 60 CE, 60 in the Christian era. So about 30 years after the Jesus event, the first Gospel was written. And why were the believers of Jesus being and experiencing so much trauma? It's because they were being persecuted severely. This is the time in history when the Romans were taking Christians and putting them in the arenas and watching them be mauled to death by wild animals as a type of entertainment. A reality show that went beyond anything that we see on TV today. Why was it that the Christians were being persecuted? Well, you see, the Jews had a special arrangement with the Romans. When the Romans occupied the Jewish territories, Israel, they realized not long afterwards that they were never going to make this group of people ever become obedient to the Roman deities and so forth. Because typically the Rome would allow cultures to continue. The only thing that they had to do was acknowledge Caesar as God and celebrate the Roman gods. Otherwise, you can do anything you want to do. But the Jews refused to do that. And it just became more trouble than it was worth. So they allowed them not to have to go through the same kind of worship of the Roman deities that they made the rest of the world. Christians eventually became a separate sect from the Jews. So even though the Christians may have been Jewish, some of them, or that Christianity came from a Jewish religion, they did not have that protection. And they too would not bow to the Roman deities. They too would not acknowledge Caesar as God, for they worshiped Yahweh. They worshiped Yahweh through Jesus, whom they believed to be the Christ. Thus, they became severely persecuted. So this is the audience that Mark is writing to. Now, apocalyptic literature. It's not one of my favorites, I'll be honest with you. I don't get off on reading the book of Revelation. I remember a few years back, our Wednesday night Bible study class, let's study the book of Revelation. Everybody's just like, oh, wow, the book of Revelation. Because so many people have taken those words and taken them out of context and made them become something that they were never meant to be. And it was about 3/4 of the way through the study that the group decided, I think we've had enough of this. Because it's kind of like learning the way that you do a magic trick. You know, once you learn how it's done, then the mystery disappears. And when you take those words of the apocalyptic writers and you really look at them, some of all the mystery and everything starts to disappear, and it just becomes kind of depressing. Mark was writing to an audience that was being severely persecuted, and his concern is that the worshipers of God through Jesus were going to be wiped off the face of the earth. If they weren't going to be murdered, they would at least be scared from it so severely that they wouldn't even consider it. So in Mark's gospel, as you'll see over the next year, there's an immediacy in it all the time. And immediately Jesus did this, and immediately God did this, and immediately there's an immediacy. In fact, it's the shortest of the Gospels. It's like Mark doesn't have time to give you all the details and to write out all the narrative. Just he gets to the points, the bullet points, and he presents it. But ultimately, apocalyptic literature is a literature of hope in very difficult times. And this is how. Apocalyptic literature was created during a time where it seemed that there was no hope that humanity could ever make this better. So they looked for a great cosmic event for God to intervene into time, space, and history. God would have to intervene in some big miraculous way in order to bring any kind of peace to the chaos that's going on around them. So that's the nature of it. That's why you have all this wonderful imagery. That's why you have the stars will be falling from the heavens. The sun will become black. The moon will no longer give its light. These great cosmic events will take place as signs that Jesus is going to return. And if you look in the story, once again, you'll see that it says Jesus will return in a cloud. Now, for those of us who didn't grow up in Hebrew school and Hebrew culture, that might just seem like, oh, that's kind of fun. We all kind of wanted to ride a cloud. Anybody here ever wanted to ride a cloud? Imagine just floating across the sky in a cloud. But a cloud was one of the images of God. It's what we call a theophany. Clouds and fire. If you remember on the Mount of Transfiguration, a great cloud descended upon the mountain and the voice of God spoke. Moses was receiving the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. A cloud covered the mountain. So a cloud is symbolic of the presence of God. So Jesus comes back in a cloud. In other words, Jesus and God are coming back together. And so the apocalypse is a time where God is going to intervene in history in such a way that God and only God can make it right and peaceful. That is the purpose behind it. And if you think about the people who were worshiping God through Jesus around 60 CE, they indeed needed a message of hope like that. Now, Mark says that we need to be vigilant. We can't fall asleep. We can't take a nap. This could happen at any moment, any time. Be vigilant. Stay awake. That's what it's on. Be awake. Constantly be on watch, because you never know when it's going to take place. And you don't want to be asleep when this event takes place. Of course, if stars are falling from the heaven and the sun goes black, I don't know that anybody's going to really fall asleep through that, but maybe they will. Who knows? And he says it could happen at any moment and any time. And then Jesus is quoted by saying, "This surely, I tell you, this will all happen before this next generation dies." Well, the reality is 2,000 years has taken place since then, and it hadn't happened. There's been a delay. And this has created actually a great deal of concern for people who've been people of faith over the years, thinking, well, maybe this is the year Jesus is going to come back, or maybe this is the year. And you have people who are always looking at the signs of the times and all that. Well, it seems that every generation we have signs that seem to indicate that the world is coming to an end. But somehow the world continues to move along. So, what are we going to do with this information? Quite honestly, I am not concerned, and I'm not losing sleep over the fact that the sun may fall out of the sky, and the stars will fall out of the sky, and the great cosmic cataclysmic event is going to take place, and the end of the world is coming. Does anybody here lose sleep over that? If so, you need to see me and Dr. Barker on a regular basis. No, we've got other things that we are concerned about. But if we look at it in a symbolic sense, each and every one of us, either right now or in the past or maybe in the future, have apocalyptic kind of events taking place in our lives. The loss of a loved one, disease, the loss of a career, or change, or job. There's something that happens in all of our lives that creates a traumatic event. So if we look at the apocalypse in